learning more about the American Retirement Association.
We felt having all of the segments together under one umbrella was very important.
Brian Graff's work on the Hill.
What we want is to make sure that the theory becomes reality.
Government updates with Brian Graff.
The truth of the matter is the Social Security system and the DC system work hand in hand.
All this and more on today's episode of The Wave Strength.
Welcome to The Wave Strength. Innovative solutions for a secure retirement. Presented by Pacific Life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wave Strength podcast series. I'm your host, Jim Breen, head of marketing with Pacific Life's institutional team. We're very excited to be in the studio here with two important guests, both Karen Neeley with Pacific Life and Brian Graff, the CEO of the American Retirement Association. Brian, Karen, thank you both so much for being with us here today.
Happy to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So what I'd love to be able to do is talk a little bit about the roles that both of you serve, both at Pacific Life and ARA. Karen, your title, the head of the Institutional Retirement Solutions Group here at Pacific Life. Perhaps you can share a little bit about your background, and then Brian, I'd love to hear more about your background.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm the head of Institutional Retirement Solutions here at Pacific Life, and that includes our pension risk transfer and our defined contribution lifetime income business. So I've been here for a little over a year, grew up in the record-keeping space. I was in the record-keeping side for about 2 decades, really working on a variety of roles from pricing to strategy to really driving our footprint in the market. So excited to be here and overseeing that retirement of today, our pension risk transfer business, and the retirement of tomorrow, our defined contribution lifetime income business.
Fantastic. And you've been on the podcast many times, so thanks so much for coming back. I really appreciate that. Brian, thank you again for joining us. Excited to learn more about you and the great work that ARA has currently underway. Perhaps before we jump into that great work, maybe you can share with our audience a little bit about your background, Brian.
Sure. So I've been at the American Retirement Association now going on 29 years.
Just a couple years.
Just a few years. Yeah. I finally vested. And I worked on Capitol Hill prior to that as essentially Congress's pension ERISA lawyer. As you probably could imagine, there's not a lot of inherent ERISA expertise in Congress, so they rely on staff to help them sort things out, and drafted the Retirement Protection Act and the Small Business Job Protection Act, which were some pretty cool things that changed the retirement plan landscape, including the 401k safe harbor. We invented the simple plan in that legislation. So that's what kind of led me to the American Retirement Association. So been involved in the benefits world for quite some time.
Fantastic. And there is so much that ARA is currently doing. Those that are familiar with the show are familiar with the episode that we recently launched with Will Hansen from ARA, handling a lot of the PSCA side of the house. And I'd love to talk more about that. But perhaps right now you can dive a little deeper into the sister organizations that fall within ARA, because there are a few.
Yeah, absolutely. There's 5. And go through the list. There's the American Society of Pension Professionals and Actuaries, ASPA, which is essentially the folks who do administration and record keeping for the retirement plan industry, both defined contribution and defined benefit. NAPA, which is the National Association of Plan Advisors, so the fiduciary advisors that work with plan sponsors to ensure that their investments are evaluated and work with plan sponsors also to educate participants about the importance of savings. There's also the National Tax Deferred Savings Association, which is more in the nonprofit governmental space for 403B and 457 plans. And then finally, there's 2 others. There's the American Society of Enrolled Actuaries, because defined benefit plans need an actuary, and actuaries need their own organization. And finally, as you mentioned, the Plan Sponsor Council of America. The system is very segmented, which can be a little bit seem complicated from outsiders, but that they all also work very well and connected together. And so we felt having all of the segments together under one umbrella was very important for our mission, which is primarily to advocate for the strength of the system, to grow the retirement plan system, to make sure the government doesn't mess it up too badly, and then finally to educate the folks in the industry across the board, whether it's advisors, administrators, record keepers, and plan sponsors, so that they can do the best job they can helping participants save for retirement.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Karen and I had the pleasure of joining our teams at the 2024 NAPA 401k Summit in Nashville several months ago. And, what a phenomenal experience. I know we've been a few times before, but I was sharing with Brian before we started, Karen, there's something unique about these conferences. There's an energy, or as Will Hansen and I were talking about in that podcast, a spark, if you will, that you sense. And I mean, maybe you can share your thoughts a little bit about that, Karen.
Yeah, I've had the privilege of joining plenty of the NAPA conferences of the past. And I think each year it seems to keep building and building. And what I love is that the conversation is evolving. So I can remember one year it was truly on the deferred comp side of things. And then one year it was, as 529s were really evolving, that was a topic of choice for that year. And I love, as we've seen in the industry, really the focus on decumulation on income, and that really be something that's coming through loud and clear, along with other critical topics at that conference. But I will say one of my favorite conferences for that spark, for that energy that we're certainly part of as you get to participate in it.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely that energy. And there's something to be said too about what you mentioned a moment ago, that word communication, that word engagement. I think often we find ourselves in this industry, somebody that did not originate in the financial industry. We, as an industry at large, we often talk at the individuals we're speaking with instead of engaging and asking questions and speaking with them. And that was something that struck me at NAPA was, wow, folks are really taking that moment, that opportunity to listen. Brian, even with you, an example, you're walking around, shaking hands, talking to people at the booths, right? And that's something maybe you don't see often. And it's a testament to the ability for the folks attending the conference, but also, the firms that are there to support the conference, to see that energy and to really feel the change that's occurring.
Well, I think it's about engagement. The only way we're going to improve the system is by talking to each other and listening to the challenges that various folks are having. We find out more about what's happening to plan sponsors, to participants, to advisors who are working with them by talking to them. We can talk at them, but we're not going to be able to really help them achieve their goals and achieve the success that they're looking for unless we hear what's concerning them, what are the challenges that they're facing, being able to develop programs that will meet those challenges. I mean, retirement income, Karen, that you mentioned is a perfect example of that. We saw very earnestly the desire on the part of advisors to try to work with plan sponsors on the idea of filling this gap. I mean, there's so many participants in defined contribution plans that are encroaching retirement. But the problem with the 401k, it's a great savings program, but it's not really a retirement plan in a sense that it doesn't naturally provide income. And so that missing piece came out of that engagement, those conversations. And then we said, okay, how do we get folks to start thinking about this? And that's where we ended up developing the retirement income for 401k education program that advisors are taking through NAPA. And that's leading now to the development of that same kind of program for plan sponsors. Because we've got to get them comfortable with this idea of providing in-plan income solutions for retirement plans. Not only advisors need to understand how to be comfortable with it and, fulfill their fiduciary obligations as they're evaluating these options, but plan sponsors need to be comfortable to embrace it, as well as educate participants about the importance of why these solutions make sense. Because what we all recognize that this is a critical need in the marketplace and in the system, but we also want to make sure that people take advantage of it.
Yeah, taking advantage of it is important, and that I think is why these sister organizations that ARA has are important, because they're touching on these unique areas to try and communicate to all people at the same time through the same journey. It's challenging. Karen, we've talked about on the podcast before, we're all on a different journey. Each of us are connecting to the information in a different way, let alone where that participant is and their own unique journeys in their lives. I know you have a lot of thoughts surrounding that as well.
Yeah, and I think education is the key, as you mentioned. And as we think of, this has not been something that we've needed to solve for a year. This has been something that for decades we've been trying to tackle as an industry. And you're seeing the importance of that education. And we're at this point with legislation, with education, with momentum, that it's starting to change the game.
Yep.
And we're really seeing plans have an increased interest for this. And therefore, advisors and their fiduciaries really looking at that plan to say, how do we provide you that right level of guidance? How do we help support you in these conversations? And I think what's actually probably the most exciting is that participants are asking for this. And we see study upon study now, the increased interest and volume of participants who are asking their employer to be that employer of choice to provide these types of solutions is huge. And as we continue to see the aging population and the decline, DB versus DC, that trend is going to continue to increase that need, and it's going to continue to increase that momentum coming from participants.
Yeah. And I think it makes, it highlights that need for education and awareness even more so. And the more we do, the more we can bring to the table through some of these great organizations, of course, the American Retirement Association, what Lou Minsky's doing with DCIA, what the Alliance for Lifetime Income has underway, of which, full disclaimer, Pacific Life is a charter member of ALI, but still, to that end, it's so important that we continue to push, because as we've seen on the floor, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, the NAPA 401k Summit, there is the glimmer in the eyes of the folks that come up to the booth, and they want to know more. They're interested. They're hungry. And that hunger is only going to come from us trying to change the narrative, to change the tide. And, the great work that is happening, even with the plan sponsor, Council of America, with Will Hansen. And I'd love to actually talk more about PSCA, but the great work that's happening on the Hill and the work that I know, Brian, you have underway personally in DC. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about what you're all doing from a legislative standpoint to change that tide.
Well, I think making sure that all the segments understand the importance of these issues, like we talked about with lifetime income, so that what we want is to make sure that the theory becomes reality. Because the failure would be if we build something and we don't execute on it. And it's critically important, not just from a business standpoint, but frankly, from a participant experience standpoint. People need lifetime income. They need these other types of innovations. A good example recently in DC was the work that we did with not just Congress, but also Treasury and IRS on the student loan matching incentive program that was part of the Secure 2.0 legislation. The government sometimes likes to make things more difficult than they need to be.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I know, shocking. And we tried to, get them to understand through several meetings that we had with them that employers aren't going to do this unless you make it flexible. If you make it easier for employers to adopt a student loan incentive match program. So basically what I'm talking about, if you're not familiar with it, is it allows for an employer to provide a matching contribution on the payment of student loan debt as if they were putting that money into the plan. So instead of making the deferral into the plan and you get a match, you pay off some of your student debt and you still get the match in the plan. So you're not matching the payment of the debt, but the match is actually going into the 401k. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of kickstarts for younger workers their retirement savings and recognizes that the reality, which is that, saving does include paying down debt, as we all know. So we work really closely with them, and they came out with some guidance that really reflected exactly what we were looking for, provides employers with a lot of flexibility. And so you're going to see, and we've already started to see some very large employers announce that they're going to adopt a program like this. And I would expect that innovation because we've gotten this, better guidance that allows for this flexibility, see more and more employers start to adopt that kind of innovation in their programs.
Yeah, that innovation, that focus on change is important. I know our government affairs team, headed up by Seaver Sowers and Sandy Sussman, they're very focused on a lot of this change and what they can do to help bring that awareness. I know, Karen, members of your team were working with Seaver and Sandy on some ERISA items recently, and there's just so much opportunity there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as you are thinking through retirement security, it's not just an episodical issue. It's not, hey, I'm 55 or I'm 65 and now I have this issue. It starts at day one of employment. How do we make sure that people are saving enough? How do we, in the student loan repayment example, how do we make sure that we're taking those barriers away that are preventing people from saving? Because, we can have the best income solutions, we can have the best accumulation solutions. If there's no money in the plan, then that participant is not going to be ready for retirement, and they're not going to unlock the value of actually having these solutions at their disposal. So the savings piece, the comprehensive nature of this, and really looking at that broader picture is so critical. And I think that's one of the things that is truly awesome about what you guys are building, is being able to look across all parts of that wallet share, if you will, and really looking at the full comprehensive view of financial wellness.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, we've unpacked a lot of the great work that ARA has currently underway. Brian, let's look into the future. What is it that you can share today that, ARA has on deck? What's that, in 5 years? Bring me to where you want to go in those 5, maybe 10 years.
Well, I think there's two critical things that are very big picture macro perspective that we continue to work on that we think are very important to take on as policy challenges over the next 5+ years. And hopefully, the first one maybe even potentially a little sooner, and that's the issue of coverage. Retirement 401k plans, 403b plans, they work great when they're in place. We know that lower income people, moderate income people are 15 times more likely to save when they are covered by a workplace savings program, as opposed to on their own in an IRA. It's the convenience of the match. The convenience of payroll deduction. It's the incentive of the match. It's the culture of savings that the industry fosters in the workplace. But when it's absent, those folks are really challenged to save because all that convenience and all those incentives are not present. Mm-hmm. So we need to address that coverage gap. It's particularly acute in smaller businesses, and particularly in communities of color. There is a tendency for a larger proportion of the population to work at smaller businesses. So it creates a diversity gap, frankly, in retirement savings that, as an organization, we think is paramount to address. There's legislation that Richie Neal, who is a congressman from Massachusetts, has been working on that we support, a lot of the industry supports, which would kind of nationalize these state-based programs. That there's about 20 states now that require employers above a certain size to have a plan in the workplace. This would essentially apply that requirement across the entire country. So like in California, for example, it's down to like one employee. If you have one employee, you have to have a plan. Most states, it's more like 5 or 10. This proposal would be 10. If you have 10 employees, you have to have a plan. And all you would need is sometime either a payroll deduction IRA or a starter K program, which doesn't require employers to contribute. But that's the first step, right? To getting people to save is getting them covered. And these programs have been very successful. They do this automatic enrollment applies. only 20-25% of the population opt out. So you've got 75-80% of the employees who are sticking with it. And that's the kind of success that we need so that the vast majority of Americans really have a meaningful opportunity to achieve a comfortable retirement. An employer-based plan is the gateway. It's the real chance that they have to save for retirement. So we've got to conquer that first challenge and try to get to where we're at 80-90% coverage across the country. Mm-hmm. The second piece that is so critically important is the foundational element of our entire system, and that's Social Security. We don't talk about Social Security a lot in our industry. It's sort of there. Not that we all know it's there, obviously, because it all comes out of our paychecks. But the truth of the matter is the Social Security system and the DC system work hand in hand. They complement each other. The 401k system was not intended to be a standalone program. Every American participates in a government-run program. It's called Social Security. It's been immensely successful. It is, by leaps and bounds, the number one program for removing people out of poverty. Far more effective than any other program we've ever enacted. We've got to make sure that it's there for the future so that participants and future retirees can know and believe that it'll be there and that they can count on it. Because together with the DC system, it works fantastic for middle-income Americans. And it actually works really well for lower-income Americans. You can get to very good replacement rates for even the lowest income Americans through Social Security. But Social Security alone won't suffice for most middle-income Americans. So they need both a DC system and Social Security to produce the income that they can count on to live comfortably in retirement.
I'm glad you mentioned that last piece. We actually hosted our Improving Retirement Outcomes Network group, which is a summit of clients and prospective clients that we met with here in Newport Beach. And one of the questions we asked is, what's the biggest retirement myth that you hear as you're out engaging with your plan or engaging with your colleagues or just in the industry? And it's that Social Security is enough. And we need to be clear, we need to communicate, we need to educate. Social Security is not enough for most individuals. And it's that connection to the DC plan with the right vehicles embedded into that DC plan to truly make sure that we're driving that comfortable retirement.
Karen, I couldn't agree with you more. Recognizing, A, that it's not enough on its own, but also recognizing that it's there and to be thinking about it holistically with your 401k or 403b plan together. Think of like benefit statements that, as advisors out there, plan sponsors, that you see being produced. A lot of them just don't mention or talk about Social Security. Yep. If you think about education meetings, we don't really talk about Social Security. We need to be factoring that in to the equation so people understand exactly what their opportunities are to save for retirement. I do think, we have this tendency to talk to participants in a way that can be kind of defeating. And what I mean by that is you're not saving enough. You're not saving enough. You get a benefit statement and it's just big red numbers that show you what you
right
don't
below the
have.
bar. You're way below that bar.
Exactly. And I think, we need we need to work on our encouragement skills and talk in terms like, they are doing a good job, a lot of them. And when you couple it with Social Security, in many cases, they're doing a great job. And we just need to do a better job of educating them about the holistic nature of their entire system.
Perfectly agree with that.
That's so true. In fact, we had Mary Beth Franklin here in the studio. We did a 3-part series with her talking about Social Security and education surrounding it. Yep. And for those viewing, you can head back over to YouTube and search Mary Beth Franklin. Not right now, though. Watch the rest of this episode. But when this one's done, you can go search for those episodes. But as we wrap up here, Brian, with this episode, how would one connect with the ARA? If somebody wants to learn more about the sister organizations or even just connect with the great work that you are doing.
Thank you. I recommend going to usaretirement.org. That's one word. We've got a lot of information about what Congress is looking at, what the regulators are looking at. There is a lot going on. There's this election that's about to happen. And when you listen to this, I think the election will hopefully have been settled by then.
Yes.
And the world hasn't ended.
And the world hasn't ended. We have a new president.
Yes.
We have a new Congress. And with that, new regime, they're going to be tackling the issue of tax legislation. And tax legislation tends to affect everyone and everything. And certainly 401k is likely to be somewhat in the mix, hopefully not in a bad way, like that almost happened last time. So we're going to be very, very active making sure that the system's protected, and you can follow us at usaretirement.org.
Well, fantastic. Brian, I really want to thank you once again for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us in the studio. So thanks again for being here.
Pleasure.
Karen, thank you again for joining us on the podcast. Always a pleasure to have you stop by and be part of the conversation.
Absolutely. Great to be here.
And to our audience, thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us on another episode of the Wave Strength podcast. I want to encourage you to head over to YouTube, to LinkedIn, Audible, and Spotify. Don't forget to search the episode, hit like, and subscribe so that you can stay current as new content becomes available. We'll see you next time, everyone.
This has been another episode of The Wave Strength, presented by Pacific Life. Don't forget to catch us on YouTube and make sure to subscribe. Although this podcast is presented by Pacific Life, the opinions and views expressed are those of the hosts and participants and do not necessarily reflect Pacific Life's views on any of the topics discussed. Unless otherwise noted, Pacific Life is unaffiliated with any other individual or company mentioned. Pacific Life is a product provider. It is not a fiduciary and therefore does not give advice or make recommendations regarding insurance or investment products. Pacific Life, its affiliates, its distributors, and respective representatives do not provide any employer-sponsored qualified plan administrative services or impartial advice about investments and do not act in a fiduciary capacity for any plan. Pacific Life refers to Pacific Life Insurance Company and its subsidiary, Pacific Life and Annuity Company. Insurance products can be issued in all states except New York by Pacific Life Insurance Company and in all states by Pacific Life and Annuity Company. Product availability and features may vary by state. Each insurance company is solely responsible for the financial obligations accruing under the products it issues. This podcast was recorded on October 3rd, 2024.
Thanks for joining us on today's show. We'd love to hear from you. Join the conversation below and leave a comment on your thoughts on what the industry can do better for participants as it pertains to lifetime income solutions. And if you'd like more interesting content, click one of these links over here.